Hello everyone and welcome to the Magic Show where you must be in it to win it. As always, my name is Jake and today I'll be going over upgrades for the Mutant Menace Fallout Precon. Now for this deck I wanted to go heavy into Mill. I am on an eternal path to make Mill good and this deck is my next stop. The commander for this deck is the Wise Mothman. He's a 3/3 flyer for 1 colorless and soul tie. Whenever he enters a battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Radiation is a new mechanic and it says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards. For each non-land card milled this way, you lose 1 life and a rad counter. This commander's second ability lets you put 1/1 counters on your creatures whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled. This is important to remember because you can also be milling those cards. When it comes to strategy, I really like how this deck can either win through combat by buffing your creatures or milling out your opponents if you can pull it off. I love the mill archetype, so it's what I'll be going for every time I shuffle this deck. One thing I should know before getting into ramp, this precon came with 40 lands, and if you know me, that will not stay the same. I have already taken out 6 lands. As mentioned before, our first category is ramp. Obviously starting off, Commander, All-Stars, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone. Then we move into a couple of ramp spells in Nature's Lore, Farseek, and 3 Visits. This deck needs a lot of mana, so it's pretty good to get these off early. Now, a couple of creatures that can ramp us is Kodama of the West Tree, Tato Farmer, and Deathrite Shaman. Kodama of the West Tree is broken because you're going to modify your creatures every time a non-land card is milled. Tato Farmer I really like. It's a new card here for Fallout. It lets you put a land card in any cards that were milled from your opponents or yourself. And if you want to move into more of a Reanimator Mutant Menace deck, then you can use its landfall ability, which gives you rad counters every time a land enters a battlefield under your control. And then obviously Deathrite Shaman, which is basically should be put in any Golgari deck. It's that good. Now moving into removal, we have Alpha Deathclaw, which is a new card. It's when it ETBs or becomes monstrous, you can destroy target permanent, which is pretty strong. Now I would have taken this card out if it didn't have Menace and Trample, which is disgusting because you can buff it and this could be potentially a way you win later in the game. Rampaging Yao Guai is great too because whatever you put into the X, you can destroy any number of artifacts or enchantments with mana value X or less, which can basically wipe the entire board of any pesky artifacts and enchantments. Canker Bloom is a perfect toolbox here. It can get rid of any artifact or enchantment or even proliferate. Now moving into more removal spells, we have Assassin's Trophy, which is one of the best removal spells in all of Magic. Casualties of War can hit 1 of each type. Nuclear Fall, which is a new card, which I think is going to do some work. It's going to give each creature twice XX until end of turn, and each player gets X rad counters. This can wipe the board and give your opponents a massive amount of rad counters. And now one of the most important categories in deck building, card advantage. Danny Pink is a new card from Doctor Who, and it's disgusting. This gives your creatures whenever a 1/1 counter is put on this creature, draw a card. Have you read the commander? Whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you put a 1/1 counter. You can do this on every single turn. If you have these 2 down, every turn cycle, you're drawing at least 2-3 cards. That's so much value. Marcus Mutant Mayor is a new card, which I think is going to do work. I know the 5 mana cost is steep, but whenever a creature with a 1/1 counter deals damage, you draw a card, or if it doesn't have a 1/1 counter, you can buff it itself. But this card is really strong because it has Vigilance and Trample, so you can buff it with your commander and keep attacking with it every single turn. Now, playtesting with this deck, I realized Mirelurk Queen is very good. On ETB, it gives any player 2 rad counters, and whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you draw a card then put a 1/1 counter on it. This only triggers once each turn, but with the rad counter, that's not really that big of an issue. But it is strong in terms of having Vigilance. If it had Trample, this card would be absolutely busted. And then we have some cards that has been around for a while. That's Guardian Project and Harmonize. Guardian Project will draw you a card whenever a creature ETBs, basically, in Commander. You don't have doubles. Harmonize is a good spell. Pay 4, draw 3 cards. Now, we move on into the category of rad counters. This is a completely new mechanic, and I believe there's some creatures and cards that just had to be noted in this category. Bloatfly Swarm comes in with 5 1/1 counters, and you can keep buffing it with your commander. Damage would be dealt to Bloatfly Swarm. You remove that many 1/1 counters and give each player a rad counter for each 1/1 counter removed. So you can massively keep buffing this with your commander and use this as a great blocker. Feral Ghoul. Now, I believe this is going to be one of the best cards in the deck. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on Feral Ghoul, and when it dies, each opponent gets a number of rad counters equal to its power. You know if this is on the battlefield, every time the Wise Mothman triggers, I am putting a 1/1 counter on Feral Ghoul. Goal is this deck is just to get as many rad counters as you can onto each opponent. Glowing One is great because it's got Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get 4 rad counters, and whenever a player mills a non-land card, you gain a life. Festing Road Roach, when it deals combat damage to a player, you get that many rad counters. Nightkin Ambusher ETB gives any player 4 rad counters and can't be blocked if the defending player has rad counters, which can be big late game. Screeching Scorchbeast, another fantastic card, has Flying and Menace. When it attacks, each player gets 2 rad counters, and whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you create 2/2s. The Master Transcendent is the secondary commander in this deck, and I absolutely love it. ETB gives a player 2 rad counters and can make a copy of any creature that goes into the graveyard. Nuke Launcher is rare because it's an equipment that whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, until your next turn, that player gets 2 Rad Counters for each spell they cast. Now we move on into the all-star category. That's Mill. Obviously, you know I'm running Alter the Brood, Mesmeric Orb, and Mind Crank, which do absolute work in this deck. And then you have Ruin Crab. You're going to have a lot of lands entering the deck. I have all the fetch lands. You got the Ram spells. There's going to be a lot of lands entering the battlefield. If you can get this down turn 1, it's going to do a lot of work. Breach the Multiverse is also a super oppressive card that can take the best creatures out of your opponent's graveyards. And Maddening Cacophony can win you the game on the spot if you have the right setup. Now for Proliferate, we have a new card, Agent Frank Horrigan. It's a 7-mana trampler that when it ETBs or attacks, you proliferate twice. And as long as it's your turn and he attacked, he has indestructible. Recon-Craft Theta is a great... Recon-Craft Theta is a vehicle that can proliferate on attack. Contagion class can put a -1/-1 counter on any creature and then proliferate for 4 mana. Inexorable Tide lets you proliferate for each spell you cast. Rad Storm, a new card coming in this precon. It has Storm and Proliferate. Canker Bloom, of course, can either be removal or proliferation. And then some Proliferate All-Stars, you have Evolution Sage, Flux Channeler, and of course, Thrumming Bird. Now moving on into the high synergy cardboard. These are the cards that are going to do the most work in your deck. And obviously the first one had to be Muldrotha the Gravetide. This card is the secret commander of this deck because with those Rad Counters, you're going to put so many cards into your graveyard and Muldrotha can bring them all back. Shieldred the True Scriptures. This is a Rise of the Dark Realms kind of card that I've been trying to put into a deck for so long. I think I finally have a home. Raoul Troubleshoot lets you cast a card that you milled once each turn. Sir Conrad the Grim, which can go infinite with a Mind Crank, or a Blood Chief Ascension, which is the card right next to it. Zealix Sanity Flare can do some massive work, especially if you have something like an Alter of the Brood out. It could potentially be a loop as long as your opponents are milling creatures. Herald of Secret Streams, if you really want to win through combat, this is the perfect card to do that with. And of course, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. Now, I know this card has a steep price. I might take it out. I don't know yet. I have it in the 99. One thing you should keep in mind whenever I make a video about a deck, if I do constantly update it on Moxfield. So if you want to keep looking at it, please do. Now on Moxfield, all the cards I took out of the precon, I just threw into the considering. So you know what I took out and then you can kind of tell what I put in. Like I might do a Finax. I'm thinking about it. It would be Finax for Vorinclex. I don't know yet because the creatures get really big to the point where Finax can do some work. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you really enjoyed this video on the Wise Mothman. If you have any suggestions or comments, please let me know down below. And always remember, the Wise Mailman will deliver the top of your library to your opponent's graveyards.